Now, I want to wrap this up by talking about why we believe these are so accurate and so important. The Gospels are dated traditionally as follows. Mark is believed to be the first Gospel written around AD 60. Now, we know that Jesus was probably born in between 4 and 6 BC, probably closer to 4 BC, because the guy who dated this, the Gregorian calendar, he got it wrong. And we've now figured he was about 3-4 years off. Jesus was born 4 to 6 BC. Jesus would have done his ministry around AD 29 to AD 32, something like that. Somewhere in there is when Jesus would have done his thing. And if Mark was written in AD 60, that's only 30 years after. And it's amazing how many fragments and manuscripts and things that we have of the early Bibles, of the early scriptures that were copied and copied. And we have, within 100 years of this, we have Bible fragments within 100 years of when they were written. All the other books of that time, they're like 500 years or more older. And yet people won't go to school and they talk about the Odyssey, Iliad, if I'm saying that correctly. They don't go, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that guy really wrote it. But everybody wants to question Scripture. And Matthew and Luke follow and are written between AD 60. I'm going to tell you, I think everything was written by AD 64, basically. John is the final gospel. Most think he wrote this between AD 90 to 100. And like I said, he would have been getting up in years. He would have been very old when he wrote this. All right? Dating the gospel. Here's why we think or know that they wrote so early. There's several reasons. The first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, prophesy that Jesus said that the temple was going to be destroyed. The temple was destroyed in AD 70. And yet none of these guys talk about how that prophecy came true. They wrote about it and said the temple will be destroyed. Jesus made that statement. The temple will be destroyed. And yet it was destroyed in AD 70, and they never wrote anything about it. So that tells us it would have been written before AD 70, right? Luke wrote the book of Acts, and he talked about Peter and Paul doing their ministry. They are the two major characters of the book of Acts, and yet when the book of Acts ends, Paul is under house arrest, and Peter hasn't been killed yet, and they were killed in AD 64. And so why doesn't Acts, which was written, we know was written after Luke, why doesn't it mention how Paul and Peter died? Because they were written and they were still alive. That would have been AD 64. So we feel Matthew, Mark, and Luke were written before AD 64, right? And so that just seems to give us some real reasoning on why those three would have been written very quickly. And so it's not like they're making stuff up. Their memory is still there. I can still remember things from 30 years ago. And I can tell stories about things that I endured 30 years ago. So it's just important for us to understand that, right? So each writer wrote for a particular reason. To explain that in modern terms, 4 superheroes are talking about Superman. And the Hulk says, man, I can't believe how strong that man is. He is incredibly strong. Why? Is the Hulk concerned about his strength? Because the Hulk is strong. Wonder Woman pipes in and she says, I can't believe Superman can fly without an invisible plane. Because she's concerned about flying, because she flies around in an invisible plane. Spider-Man says he goes from building to building without spider webs. I think that's amazing. Why? Because Spider-Man goes from building to building. And then you have the Flash. And he goes, I can't believe how fast Superman is. He is so fast. Why? Because the Flash is fast. Now, did those 4 superheroes disagree with each other about Superman? No. They just came from a different perspective. And that's what we get from these guys. They all wrote from a different perspective. And so as we finish this up, Matthew was an apostle, a Jew, and he wrote to a Jewish audience. Mark was writing to the Romans under the instruction of the apostle Peter, and Luke wrote to all the Gentiles under the direction of the apostle Paul. John wrote to any that were unbelievers so that we might believe.